We are now recording the meeting. All right, so let's get started here. Thank you, everybody, for coming to our virtual event today. We're welcoming back Cherry and Jerry, I think, for the third virtual presentation that they're doing for us. And today they're going to talk about women of the ragtime era. A little bit of housekeeping to get out of the way. I am going to be here the entire time, but I'm going to turn off my video and mute myself so as not to be a distraction. If you're having any technical difficulties, please feel free to use the chat function to let me know, and I'll do my best to assist you. Again, this program is being live streamed to Facebook, so you're welcome to also watch it there or tell your friends about it so they can watch it there. And we are recording the presentation as well to put up after the fact on the library's YouTube channel. I think that's about all I've got to say. I did already put in the chat function that at the end, Cherry and Jerry will answer your questions if you have any, and I will put a link to a brief feedback survey in using the chat function, and we appreciate any feedback you want to give us. So I think without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you guys.
Good afternoon, and thank you for spending some time with us. I am Jerry Rabushka.
I'm Isaac Cherry.
And we are Cherry and Jerry. And we want to welcome you to, yes, our third program with the DeKalb Library. This is Women of Ragtime. Now, as the music industry was dominated by men, there were still many women who composed ragtime, and as the men were surprised and maybe even aggravated to find out, women composed just as well as the men did, but they had a lot of barriers, because we're talking, 1905, 1910, women couldn't vote. There were a lot of things that women were supposed to not do because they were supposed to be proper young ladies.
That's right, Jerry. In most middle-class families, however, it was the women who learned how to play piano and provided the entertainment in the home. And as they started to play music, they started to hear ragtime and actually learn and compose ragtime songs. Some of these, quote, proper ladies became well-known composers, creating national hits that were recreated for dance bands and orchestras. So we're going to look at a few of these women whose music have endured today, as well as a couple of ragtime songs that have never went out of style by a couple of famous women who even performed them.
So first, though, we do want to thank the DeKalb Library and Samantha for working with us to bring these shows. We really appreciate it. And we want to thank you for spending some time with us, whether it is live or later on in the week or whenever you have a chance to listen to us. We're really happy you are listening. So we're going to take you back first to Indianapolis. And who are we going to talk about first?
This woman's name is May Afterhide. It's a mouthful. May Afterhide was born in Indianapolis in 1888 to a well-to-do middle-class family. She came up on North Meridian Street, for those of you who are familiar with Indianapolis. Her father was a successful banker who was also an accomplished violinist. May's aunt was a music teacher and also occasionally performed with the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra, and she instructed May in classical piano as well. When May was a teenager, her father sent her east to finishing school like a lot of families did. And having come back, her dad was surprised to find that she'd been learning how to compose some of her own ragtime songs. While her father was a patron of the arts, he didn't really too much care for her coming back, having spent so much money on her education, having played ragtime music. But she didn't let that stop her. She got two of her best friends, some of her BFFs, got the music cover art, the arranging, and got the music engraved. And it ended up putting out one of her very first rags. It was called Dusty Rag in 1908. It sold slowly at first, but it began to pick up steam and ended up selling out quickly. It quickly became arranged for dance orchestras, and now is considered one of the finest rags and most important from the Indiana, Ohio region. We're going to play for you Dusty Rag from 1908.
Dusty Rag by May Osterheide from 1908. And the success of Dusty, and Dusty was named after a friend of hers. It was not named after a nasty cleaning utensil, by the way. But her father kind of came around when he realized that, yes, she was serious about this and she was really successful. And he opened his own music publishing company, the J.H. Osterheide Music Publishing Company, and it helped May get more of her works in print. And along with May, a lot of her friends also got their pieces published. And it gave Indianapolis a really cool place in ragtime history, as a lot of people, both men and women, had music published that would not have had May not pushed ahead with this. So in 1908, she was 20 years old. She married an architect named Mr. Kaufman, and they moved to Richmond, Indiana. And she wrote her second rag, and this is called the Richmond Rag in honor of her new city. One and two and... So again, the Richmond Rag by May Osterheide. And unfortunately, Mr. Kaufman's career did not come off the ground, even though he was an architect and that's what he needed it to do. But they moved back to Indianapolis and they worked for May's father for a while, or he did. They did really well financially, and May had like a 5-year composing career. She wrote rags, songs, and waltzes. And unfortunately, her husband was an alcoholic, and then they lost a child and they adopted a daughter who was, everybody says, problematic. And then the family moved to Pasadena in the 40s, and she outlived both her husband and her daughter, but she had arthritis and spent her last days in a wheelchair. So her life didn't come out ending as good as it started, but she is recognized today as the greatest of the female ragtime composers. And even in the 40s, a trumpeter named Bunk Johnson took some of these rags and did a Dixieland arrangement of them. So we're going to bring May back to you before the end of the show.
That's right. Our next female composer is Charlotte Blake. Charlotte Blake is one of the more prolific female composers that we'll talk about this afternoon. She had about 40 compositions, so she had a lot more of them that have survived. And her career spanned from 1903 to 1919, which is a very long time. 1918 being considered what historians call the end of the ragtime era. She was born near Columbus, Ohio, and by the age of 18, she was living in Detroit working for the Remick sheep making company as a clerk. And then from there, she became an arranger and started composing some of her own songs. And by the age of 18, one of her very first pieces were published. At first, they wanted to keep her identity a secret because they didn't believe that women could sell music or even create music as well as men could. So they put her name out on her sheet music as just C. Blake. But it was hard to convince the industry that she could write as well as men. But composers like her, Irene Giblin, who we'll talk about later, and May Opterheide soon would change these guys' minds and help convince them otherwise. As her music became more popular, they allowed her name to actually be written as Charlotte Blake on the sheet music. And so much so that they often promoted her near the beginnings of the catalogs.
There's a contemporary article about her songs, and they even said at the time that women had a disadvantage because a man could go to the club at 1 or 2 in the morning and light up a cigar and kind of say, hey, you want to give my music a try? But women were not allowed to do that. So they had this and just the disadvantage of a male-dominated industry. But Charlotte Blake's ragtime and a lot of her popular tunes became pretty popular back in the day. And along with ragtime, she wrote songs, waltzes, other instrumental pieces. She worked with some well-known lyricists, and her probably most famous rag these days, and one that was arranged for dance orchestra back in her day, was called That Poker Rag, which she wrote in 1909. She was about 24 years old at this time. And so again, That Poker Rag by Charlotte Blake. And that Poker Rag by Charlotte Blake, and they're not talking cards. The sheet music cover actually has a big red devil poking a little red devil with a hot poker. So that's what this brings to mind. So after her musical career was over, Charlotte wound up living in Los Angeles. And she spent 20 years as a clerk for the Douglas Aircraft Company. And she lived in a trendy part of town near Hollywood and Highland Boulevard there, just north of Hollywood Boulevard. Later on, she lived in Santa Monica, California, and that's where she spent the rest of her life. When she was 92 years old, Max Morath, who is a well-known ragtime performer and composer, and this was about 1977. He recorded that Poker Rag in an album called The Ragtime Women, and it brought this piece and a lot of other music by women out of obscurity, you know, back in a time when people were not listening to this type of music. So we're going to do another piece by Charlotte Blake, and this is an earlier one from 1908, and this is called The Gravel Rag. So The Gravel Rag by Charlotte Blake, 1908. And along with ragtime, she, like I said, she wrote other types of music. And one of her big successes was a song called Harbor of Love from 1911 that was recorded by several artists back in the day. And we have a version sung by Walter Van Brunt that we're going to play you a little clip of.
Through darkness, your love light is gleaming, bright as the sun high above. I have no fear when storm clouds appear. You're my harbor, my harbor.
It's a beautiful song.
It is. When you hear the whole thing, it's really cool.
Well, who sings that, Jerry?
Walter Van Brunt. If you go to YouTube and type in Walter Van Brunt and Harbor of Love, you can probably find his recording.
Another female composer is Irene Giblin. Irene Giblin was probably one of the youngest. Shoppers in downtown St. Louis department stores back in the turn of the century were very likely to walk past her trying to sell you some sheet music. She was a very talented teenage girl playing the hits of the day at stores like Sticksbury and Fuller. She would go there and play school afterwards. Before then, she would actually start at the Grand Lita department store and then later go on downtown to the Sticksbury and Fuller in hopes of selling you some sheet music. She advertised music published by the Remick Company. And by the time she was 16, published her very first rag called Chicken Chowder. This was a very popular tune. It was recorded by some famous musicians back in the day and rearranged for dance bands and orchestras. A publication called the Music Trade Review recognized her as St. Louis's youngest composer. This recording that I'm about to play for you is by famous banjo player Wes Osmond, and this is a snip of the song called Chicken Chowder Rag.
So for a short time, Irene Giblin's life took the same trajectory as May Ofterhide. In 1908, when she was 20, she got married, and she became Irene Giblin O'Brien. And she also, like May, had about a 5-year composing career and had 9 or 10 compositions published through 1913. Most women had short careers as a composer because after they got married, they were expected to kind of give it up and devote time to their husband and children. And writing ragtime wasn't, as we mentioned, a proper thing for a married woman to be doing, particularly. But she lived in St. Louis till 1974, and she played piano all of her life. And her son, who was interviewed later on, said ragtime was her favorite style, which is good for us because we have some cool music by Irene Giblin to share. This is a piece called Ketchup from 1910, and it is also called a slow drag. And a slow drag is a dance that originated in the African American community, and you would dance real slow and close, and a lot of people thought it was scandalous, but nonetheless, it's kind of a cool sound. This is a rather hypnotic song. So again, this is Ketchup by Irene Giblin from our hometown here in St. Louis. interesting tune, a lot of dissonances in there that are kind of fun to play. So there's a couple articles we found in some research from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. This one is very, I'd say, inappropriate for how we would write something today, but this gives you a little glimpse as to some things she was up to aside from writing ragtime. And this is called Miss Irene Giblin of Visitation Parish is 30 ahead for Queen from 1907. And it reads, now that the public can vote for the Queen of the St. Patrick's Ball, the contest, which is being conducted by Father Dunn's Newsboys Journal, has attracted 132 members of the fair sex representing 65 parishes. Several parishes have agreed upon one young woman in each parish and are giving their choice undivided support. There are many belles among them who are enthroned high in the affections of the gallant youths of different parishes. The judges of the contest examined the ballots Sunday, and Miss Irene Giblin leads by 30 votes. And later the next week, she was ahead by 50 votes. So I don't know if she won, but apparently she was doing pretty well.
In another article from the Post-Dispatch in 1908, this was a concert designed to sell sheet music. It said, quote, tomorrow afternoon between 2 and 5 o'clock, Miss Jane Williams and Miss Irene Giblin will play the biggest hits recently made in New York. Visit our music department in the basement.
So we are going to move to a couple women who were ragtime performers.
That's right. One was Corita Day. Corita Day was the stage name of Kerry Washington. Her claim to fame these days is appearing as a leading lady across from Ernest Hogan in the Broadway play The Oyster Man. Hogan was considered the father of ragtime, not because he's the first to write it, but the first to actually notate it and get it out in the public. And he was also one of the top entertainers of the day who made huge strides for other African-American performers. Corita Day, however, was successful way before she even met him, and well after she had even participated in The Oyster Man. Much of what we do know about her comes from newspaper articles written by St. Louisan Lester Walton, who resided in New York City and wrote about the happenings of African-Americans in the entertainment field. He wasn't too impressed with her or any of her performances, but he ended up coming around. As she continued her career, most reviews told you when she came to your town, she was somebody you would never, ever want to miss.
And we found a little review of her by Lester Walton, and talks about one of her shows in New York at a black theater called the Lafayette. And it says, Miss Corita Day, tall and lithesome, is headlining a bill, doing a strong single and earning her share of applause. Miss Day has not been seen in these parts since when she was leading woman for Ernest Hogan, and she deserves to be classed in the category of those who have gone forward as an artist in the theatrical firmament. Miss Day has always been one particular soul about her appearance on stage, and at the Lafayette Theater this week she presents a most pretty picture, a most fascinating one. Miss Day is the same nimble dancer as of yore and executes a number of difficult steps. Her songs are cleverly put over, and the number in which she sings to a man in the audience goes over very big. And we're going to play one of the tunes from The Oyster Man that she sang as the leading lady, and this was written by Ernest Hogan, and the lyrics were by Lester Walton, so it's kind of a team effort of the three of these folks. This is called I Can't Keep My Eyes Off of You from 1907. 1, 2, 3, 4. Can't Keep My Eyes Off of You, performed back in those times by Carita Day. And she toured even down to Cuba, where, again, Lester Walton tells us she introduced audiences to American-style dancing. And she still sang this same song in her act several years later, even. Eventually, she settled in Chicago, where she married and set up an upscale dress and lingerie shop on State Street. And so she lived, and apparently somebody told me, till 1951, so she had a good run of things. Now, this is probably the most famous personality we're going to be talking about.
That's right. She's not really known as being a composer, but more of a performer. Her name is Sophie Tucker. Sophie Tucker's family were immigrants from the Ukraine, and she started singing in her father's restaurant in Connecticut. And eventually, she worked her way up into vaudeville, and she found that immigrants were often cast into ethnic stereotypes and not necessarily the ethnicity of the person that you actually are. But anyhow, she ended up having to perform in blackface, which led to her having a lot of scrutiny and a lot of bad feelings about herself. However, she had the opportunity to actually perform being her actual self, because her makeup, she was on tour, her makeup actually went one direction and she went another direction. And so she had to perform just as who she was, Sophie Tucker. Well, it turns out that she ended up being a very big hit just being who she was. And ever since then, she performed without wearing blackface makeup. And it was actually there that she let the public know that she was actually Jewish.
And this was not an era of political correctness, and basically her promoters said, Sophie, you're too fat and you're too ugly to go out as yourself. And that's why they made her go out in makeup. But she actually used that in a lot of her songs and joked about it. And a biography of her I read talked about how she actually reached a lot of women and made them feel a lot more comfortable who weren't, in the 20s and the 10s, the really skinny flapper girls. So she did a lot of good for a lot of people in that sense. Now, she finally had a chance to perform in the Ziegfeld Follies. She was playing a minor role, but they gave her a set of 3 solo songs. And she did one tune that we're going to play for you, written just for her, and it was a way, again, of letting folks know about her Jewish heritage. And this song, written by a man named Ray Walker, published by Irving Berlin, is called The Yiddish Rag. I believe it's from around 1909. 1, 2, 3, 4. The Yiddish rag, not as performed, but it was performed by Sophie Tucker, and her set went over really, really well. And the leading lady of that night was Nora Bayes, and Nora came out afterwards, and everybody was wanting Sophie to come back, so they pulled Nora off stage, and they put Sophie Tucker back on to do a couple more tunes. And you can imagine this did not go over well with Miss Bayes, who had Sophie relegated to her smaller role in the Follies thereafter. But Tucker went on. She lived till about 1966, and she performed till she could perform no more. She was a success for about 50 more years after that. We have her in 1911 here singing her signature song, Some of These Days.
I love that song. It sounds very contemporary. The next composer we're going to talk about is Ethel Smith. Ethel Smith was born in Kansas, in Emporia, Kansas, in 1887, and her family moved to St. Louis in 1895. For a while, she lived on Delmar Boulevard here in St. Louis, the same street where the legendary, most famous ragtime player Scott Joplin lived, although she lived 3 miles west. We have about 3 pieces of music left that have survived her, and the first and most famous is called The Black Cat Rag, which she co-wrote at the age of 18 with Frank Wooster in 1905. This rag was arranged for dance orchestras back in the day so that people could dance. We have a piano roll of The Black Cat Rag that I'm going to play for you right now. Such a happy song. Well, 2 years later, Smith published the Fontella Rag, dedicated to the Fontella Club, which was on 1924 North 14th Street, for those of you who are familiar with St. Louis. Just about half a mile from where Crown Candy is today. Crown Candy, just an aside, is a legendary malts and burgers place, so if you ever come to St. Louis, you definitely have to come there if you're into...
And it opened in 1913, so Ethel, when she was a little older, may have gone up there and got herself a malt.
Yeah, I want a malt.
So one of the interesting things about Fontella is this little motif here. Because she brings it back in several strains, and there's a lot of ideas that come back and forth in this piece, and that's kind of unusual for a lot of ragtime. Usually you get done with one thing and you're on to the next. So this is a really cool piece of music, again, by Ethel Smith from St. Louis. It's called The Fontella Rag, published in 1907. 1, 2, 3, 4. Fontella Rag by Ethel Smith. And Ethel actually had a career in music. She was a music teacher at a place called the Axel Christensen School of Ragtime in our state capital here at Jefferson City. And Axel Christensen was a performer and composer, but he franchised out schools where people would learn ragtime and other types of music. And she lived until 1930, and she left us a couple cool pieces of music. So before we close out, first thing, we want to say thank you so much.
Thank y'all so much
For spending time with us. We really had a great time. Want to tell you, if you want to follow us from here on out, you can go to Cherry and Jerry Music on Facebook and Cherry and Jerry Ragtime Music on YouTube. And if you want to see us live, we will be in Chicago at McCormick Place at the Oddities and Curiosities Expo on August 28th, and we'll be playing like half-hour sets throughout that day from around 10 till maybe 5:30.
Tell your friends, tell your families, even if you can't make it. Thank you.
It's an interesting event. So we got one more piece. They said we'd come back to May After Hyde, and this is a really awesome piece of music and probably her most famous tune. This is called The Thriller, and as we get into it, you'll probably see why. So The Thriller, 1909, May After Hyde. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, guys, that was fantastic. Do any of our Zoom viewers have any questions for Cherry and Jerry?
Because we're over here, we can't tell if you wrote anything or not. We're over here away from the camera, but
Yeah, nothing chat function, just a whole lot of me giving people the link to the survey. So I'm glad you brought that up. I did put the link to our feedback survey in the chat function. It's 2 or 3 questions, very, very brief, but we appreciate any feedback you're willing to give us. And if I'm not hearing any questions, I think we can let Cherry and Jerry go.
okay. Well, thank you
thank
everybody
you.
for your time. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Camille, and thank you, Michelle. Thank you for hanging
Samantha.
out with us.
All right.
Yeah, thank you guys. This has been
Right.
wonderful.
Good to
Cool.
hear. We're so excited. So
We hope to see you live someday in the future.
Yeah.
2022.
Yes, you will plan on it.
Alrighty.
All right.
Take
All
care.
right, bye guys, and
Bye,
thank you everybody for
everybody.
coming.